So I'll leave it to you as to. For man, the thinking creature, to accept as inevitable his ultimate incapacity to understand the nature of life is not good enough. It is not an acceptable excuse or explanation in that. If he is intelligent enough to realize that his efforts thus far have failed to produce adequate answers to the big questions, then he is intelligent enough to consider the need for an alternative to his present approach. For the weak to plead weakness and the simple to cling to their ignorance is for men to remain weak and less intelligent than they could be. Ordinary men, regardless of their contrary protestations, want to be led, and not just in behavior, but in thinking as well. And above all, want to believe that they're being led by some force other than simply life itself. A situation comprehensible only to the more conscious. One man said he's come to the conclusion that he's little more than a big hunk of walking around flesh with a shrill little dazed voice stuck in its head. He adds, however, that he suspects a potential for something more, though he's uncertain as to exactly what. If certain troubles are caused by forces beyond your control, then as painful as they may be, since there's nothing you can do about it, forget them. But if they come through forces over which you can exert some control, then shame on you, and the pain is deserved. And upon hearing this said, a man asked, but how can you tell when something is beyond your control and when it is not? And the answer to that is simple. Annoying perhaps, but nonetheless simple. If you have to ask how to make the distinction, you're not yet capable of recognizing it. Life requires no man to swim who cannot locate the sea. And upon hearing this, a boy asked his father, is this why mystics were once reputed to carry around little vials of water around with them everywhere they went? One guy's theory is that men's individual personalities are just a result of certain unrecognized, institutionalized pressures. The institution being collective humanity itself, operating under direct, unrealized pressure from life. Once upon a time, there was a father who swallowed his son, only to have the boy pop his head back out and say, why did you bother with this when you know full well that no amount of foolishness will forestall the arrival of tomorrow? Sure evidence of the degree to which one is civilized is the extent to which one's life is unnecessarily complicated. One man says he suspects he was put into a hypnotic trance at birth. He says he doesn't know by whom, and he doesn't know why, but he suspects it just the same. One legend tells of an ancient band of would-be mystics who decided they could never reach their goal as long as they stayed in the place where they were born. So they decided to leave and journey forth into new areas, and they were sincere in their decision, and some of them would even sometimes venture outside their hometown. But taken as a whole, they dreamed of and discussed the abandonment of their present position more than they did actually make any sustained effort pertinent thereto. In that the transcendental migration begins firmly in one's thoughts, it can prove tricky indeed to escape and ever advance there beyond. In fact, just trying to describe to the mind, in the most general of terms, what this is all about, sounds to it as though it's being told that it would be much better off if it didn't exist. Sheep forever look to the skies for direction, and fish to the hills for salvation. Only a man awake knows which side his fax machine is buttered on. One guy says, I figure it's not so bad being ordinary as long as you remain unaware of it. And I mean totally unaware. Until you reach a certain understanding behind all mystical methods seems madness. But beyond that point, behind all mystical madness, you recognize methods. Today's news is yesterday's news recycled, with yesterday's news being a recycled version of the day before, and it a recycled edition of the day before that, and so on. Not unlike the normal evolution of man's thinking. A man once asked a mystic, "What drug has been most commonly involved in the achievement of the more conscious state?" And the mystic replied, "Food." And the man said, "No, be more specific." And the mystic said, "Thought." "No," said the man, "be more specific than that. I want to know the really secret drug you guys use to attain enlightenment." So the mystic told him, "Life, my friend. Just being alive and looking around a lot." "More bad luck," thought one concerned mother as she looked down at her school-age son. "All the other children have head lice and we can't afford any." The simple love the loud, the gaudy, and the ostentatious, while the more civilized favor the reserved, the restrained, and the understated. And to see this, you need not look at just their cars and clothes, but to their minds, speech, and behavior. And all of this, taken in a wider context, representing counter areas in the timeline of man's continuing progression, which is to say that the past always seems loud, gaudy, and ostentatious, while dreams of the future strike man as otherwise. And one man mused, "Head lice on the outside of the skull is not the real problem. It's when they get inside your head, in your mind, agitating and aggravating your thinking." After some years of research, and people think vaudeville's dead. Yeah, but there are more people that think the mystical life is deader than vaudeville. After some years of research, one man has reached the conclusion concerning the development of mystics that they have no formative years. In the ordinary world of the mind, there are only two types of knowledge: knowledge that is useful and knowledge that is entertaining. Only that of a transcendental nature can be both. And one man's question became, which is the greater danger, to talk too much or to listen too much? Yeah. And it was a private inquiry just between him and himself. There was once a time when those involved in the struggle for greater awareness were not called mystics, but rather were known by the name the future. And I should point out that while I did say there was once a time when this was so, there has actually not yet been such a time, for it exists forever in the future. And since yesterday can never catch up with tomorrow, any description of mystical activity is always outdated, even when first spoken. In what strange times is it that progress seems destructive, weakness is taken as strength, ignorance as the norm, and the debasement of man is celebrated? You know in what times. The eternal, mundane now. There are three major categories of people who dislike the name tag mystic. Ordinary men with no interest in such matters, who consider those who do as deluded, if not insane, and those who do have a theoretical interest therein, but consider the sobriquet mystic either far too specific or too intolerably vague. And the third group who disfavor the word is real mystics themselves. All of this based on the foolishness of trying to nail the wind to the wall, but at an expanded level even more so, in that were the foolishness to succeed, the damage done to the wind, in the case of the few, would be substantial. After some years of studying the matter, one man began to wonder if the reason the work of the mystics seems so secret and is so seldom seen is not because it's hidden, but rather due to the fact that what mystics actually do, they never talk about. More tall tales. One guy was from another planet, and to keep the fact hidden, he just told people he was a mystic. And finally, all the simple know to talk about is themselves, while all that the more civilized know to talk about is what they think. What do you talk about? Out of all the descriptions that have been used throughout the years of enlightenment or awakening or to be more conscious, beyond all of the imagined or even used but imaginary dream-like terms that sound extremely metaphysical, otherworldly, and etc., there is something quite specific that can be said that is at the heart of the distinction between such a state, whatever it be called, in man's ordinary state. And that's simply this, is knowing the difference between those areas of life over which a man has no control, being able to recognize them as distinguished from any areas, or singular, in which he might. Thank you, and that's all. It's tempting, but I quite understand all the dreams that people have, and mysticism itself historically seems to contribute thereto, of all sorts of dreamy ideas of conversing with spirits and guides and having magical powers and etc., which is, if for no other reason, life can use that to camouflage what's really going on and discourage ordinary people from ever getting involved, because ordinary people consider all such ideas to be right on the verge of insanity. And from one view, they're quite correct. But of course, that same kind of insanity, if you notice, is all a matter of degree. That same kind of insanity is taught and apparently believed on almost any street corner in this country, in edifices known as churches. Same sorts of things, it's just under a more socially acceptable marquee than mysticism, which is normally in very small, ad hoc, ephemeral groups, and usually people not all that tied to the community and not at all normally involved in what appears to be charitable works and goodwill toward their fellow man. Not that they do not have it, but there is no display of it. They're not out engaged in any public activity. But at any rate, what is normally referred to as the mystical, unless someone actually looked into a dictionary, the mystical is just taken by ordinary minds to be anywhere from extremely dubious, as I said, to just outright insanity. It's just people that psychotic. It's people who maybe have been on drugs, but their idea, the ordinary mind's idea of a mystic, is someone who is absolutely out of touch with reality. I got news for it. The definition I'm giving you, the description I'm giving you, if you followed it, I'll repeat it, puts one closer, or my definition, if it be valid, would be describing a person closer in touch with reality than everyone else. Because I assure you, and I'm going to point out, you just never thought about it, that the ordinary mind is far out of touch with reality, and knows it, knows it. So to accuse mystics, regardless of the fact that the accusations are valid from one view, but to accuse the whole area of mysticism as being people out of touch with reality, contraire. Because now if you take my description of what a real mystic would be, he, above all, that one distinguishing, very pragmatic, non-otherworldly, non-vague, non-metaphysical delineation, distinction between a mystic and everyone else is, he does know and recognize the forces, the areas of life that are absolutely beyond his control, and any who might be an exception, any areas that might be an exception. Ordinary people make no such distinction. They're not supposed to. The collective of humanity, in one sense, is always being driven to look over the horizon. People continue to talk about the future, the collective consciousness of man. I don't have to draw it. There's nothing mystical about this. It's just not normally taken into consideration, but I keep bringing it up. There is a level of intelligence for all of humanity at any given time. And it varies and manifests itself differently, even right now. 1996, there is a worldwide level of consciousness. Or a little more specific, there is a worldwide level of human thought going on. Now, it's a matter of whether you can see it, and it's very difficult to talk about, and it's very difficult to see it on that level, but there is. And it manifests itself, obviously, in different areas, in different ways, to various degrees. All within, there is this one great level right now, at every time, of the thinking ability, the level of consciousness of everyone on this planet. There is one broad category. There are lesser categories in that right here, we could pick out a point on the globe, and there would apparently be a different level, or at least a different manifestation of how they think, in what way they think, how broad is their mental awareness, and then point out to another area. Just close your eyes, and now you can spin it and still put your finger on the globe, and it's very likely you'll pick out an area that if you knew anything about it, and if you don't, I'm just going to tell you, that it would be observably an apparent fact that the second area we point out is not at the same level of intelligence, not the same level of consciousness at the first. So keep that in mind. That's no big secret. But there is yet within that, if you put them all together, there is one general observable level. And I don't mean just I can do it. There's always been people that can. It's there. It's not hidden, just whether you can sense it or not. That on this planet, no matter what people say, no matter where you hear today on the news, let's say, someone in an area whose culture and whose language and whose religion may seem foreign to yours, or is, apparently is very foreign, and they are making some comment about the social structure of their country, their plans for their country, and you listen to it and think, the man's wearing a suit, he's got a haircut, he's the leader of some country, and yet, it's like another planet almost, that you say that is not a civilized attitude. Maybe they're discussing the way in which they treat the official policy toward crime. And you may say, well, that is so harsh that it's still a modern state, evidently. And as I said, the guy seems to represent fairly educated people, but the opinions, the ideas he's expressing about some social question, such as crime, is barbaric. You can say that is completely behind the times. And from your view, it seems to be. I just want you to understand that all of that taken into consideration, there is still limits that even if, relatively speaking, we're talking about that there is a low level on this planet right now. The most backward areas, the most uncivilized, the most uneducated, people still running mainly by the red circuit of the instinctive drive for survival, from there up to the highest. Normally considered Western Europe, the United States, the civilized, educated, technically advanced countries. There is still simply a limit. And that limit is not theoretical, or this range is not theoretical, and is not so vague and imprecise it can't be seen. It is just obvious as hell. Even though there seems to be a wide differential between the less civilized and advanced areas and the more, it is still an observable area, and neither one of them can go any lower or any higher. Now, having pointed that out, which is still no great shakes to do that, and to point out that technology, that men dream of things, and nowadays the lag time between what men dream of being able to do technically and the execution of same becomes less and less. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the world of the inner world of man, the world of consciousness, the world of his spirit. This general level of consciousness is being driven by life, and always has been, to where they are the mind without knowing it. This general level of consciousness on this planet is always looking, without knowing it, is always reflecting what's over the horizon. They're always reflecting the future. Now I want you to understand what I'm trying to point out. Men do that. Humanity has always been doing that technically. And by that I mean in an external world, the manipulation of what seems to be the environment, not their internal world. And so men are always dreaming. They're dreaming of cold fusion. I'm not predicting where it will happen or not. They were dreaming of flying back in the 1600s, the 1400s. They were imagining men flying. Not just idiots, not just people on dope. Guys with some intelligence were dreaming like it must be possible. And it took hundreds of years, but they, in a sense, life was making their mind, some individual's consciousness, perceive the future, what was over the temporal horizon. But there's nowadays less and less lag time that they can dream of something like, well, we should be able to do so-and-so. Nobody's done it, and several people in the area nowadays of whatever field it is, chemistry or physics, aeronautics, computer science, and go, well, this can't be, well, nobody's ever done it. But a guy goes, hey, nowadays it's not a matter of 200 years. It might be a matter of 5 years. It might be a matter of a year. But notice this, the dreams of man's spiritual life, his consciousness, the dreams that humanity has been, the dreams have been placed in man that are still reflective of the future, they are, as yet, my best, most conservative estimate to you is that they are 5,000 years still behind. I'm saying estimate to make it sound more off the cuff, like I don't really know for sure. It is more or less at least 4,000 to 5,000 years behind. That is, the dreams of what would be, or what humanity should be, or what men will be at any second now. What men would be if they were more conscious, if they were more intelligent. It's always been on the basis, for instance, to take the Western view, the Greeks, talking about 2,500 years ago, them dreaming of what would be a true Athenian, a true Greek citizen. It sounded as though it were far removed from the world of gods, although it was tied in, but all the way from that to then a true Roman, a real Jew, then a Christian, then a Muslim. The dreams are always this, that they're dreaming when they talk about, well, let's take, from you people's view, probably the easiest, the most common area would be the Old Testament prophets, all the way from that to Jesus, all sort of crammed in together. It's all more or less the same thing. Them describing how a man should live, what he should be like, how he should think, how he should behave. And what are they describing? Now, I know they're saying, well, if you converted to Christianity, let's say, if you became a Christian and you truly live by the precepts of Jesus, what he taught, you would be such and such. Nobody's ever done it. Nobody pretends to do it that's sane, even those who are in Christianity as a profession, who do it as a living. If they are sane and ordinary, they do not profess that they can do it. They say it is simply that which we strive for. It is the goal. So what are they saying? They're only saying what I'm describing. It is life-making men. Civilized, ordinary men. They're making men at the general level of consciousness, of which Christianity and all the major religions are a part thereof. What they are describing, but they think anyway, what they're describing is simply above the horizon, past the horizon of consciousness, and no one's yet to achieve it. But now let's be a little more specific. When they describe what a Christian would be like, when they describe how a Jew would react to his neighbors, when a Muslim describes how he would treat those who mistreat him, how he would treat those who try to cheat him, how he would treat those who treat him well. All that's at the hearts of religion. What are they describing without knowing it? They're describing a man. When they say a good Christian, a good Jew, or a Buddhist saying someone who actually achieved Buddhahood, what are they describing when they give these definitions of do not, well, like from the New Testament, go back to that, when they say, well, a real Christian would not cast a stone at someone, would not attempt to pluck a speck of dust out of his neighbor's eye until he had removed a ton of dirt out of his own. Or that a Christian would not return a spite for spite, would not return hostility and aggression for etc. And all of that strikes people as being something admirable. Ordinary people, the heart of humanity. It always strikes them as being a most admirable goal. Probably non-periel. It's beyond just being a good citizen, that if a man could do that, whoo. But what are they describing? Again, keeping in mind it is yet to happen. The lag time started out. Back then they didn't know it, but the lag time thus far has been approximately 5,000 years. And I must suggest to you, if you notice, it's not an attack on humanity. and it's not a history lesson. But right now, the general level of humanity is not demonstratively closer to being able to be a good Christian or a good Greek citizen or Athenian citizen or a good Buddhist than they were 2,000, 4,000 years ago. We simply have not. They're still talking about it. And sometimes the phrases change a little bit. And now there are even psychological and sociological descriptions, political descriptions of what would be a citizen, what would be a participant in the world, that are now the same things. They just seem to be stripped of their past clerical trappings, but it's the same descriptions. They're describing, well, here's what I'm getting at. You knew I would. Once that finger comes out. What are they describing when they say what a Christian would do or what a real Jew would be capable of doing? You know what they're doing? What they're describing without knowing it? They're describing a man who can discern the difference between those forces in life over which he has no control and those he might. So if we're going to call a Christian someone who can treat his fellow man as himself, which I point out is really, could be used as the verbal touchstone of all religions, all civilization, all the definitions of being civilized, all definitions of being a true Sumerian, Athenian, Roman, Brit, Frank, whoever. It's all, the distinguishing mark is, there would be a man, would be able to treat your neighbor as yourself. You would have to understand, you would have to be able to distinguish between those forces over which you've got no control, and those which you do. If you can do that, you would also understand. See, here's what no one takes in consideration. Then you would understand how to treat your fellow man, because you would understand why he treats you like you do, like he does. Whereas it is now, it sounds as though it's theoretical to tell a man, well, listen, would you like to live a better life? You know, if he wouldn't go for a religious come on, if you said, won't you become a Christian? If you wouldn't go for that, if you just tried to tell a man, wouldn't you like to lead a better life? And he'd go, oh yeah. You go, what you got to do is treat your fellow man as you would like to be treated. And the guy thinks, all right. He said, but I can't do that because my fellow man won't treat me right to start with. And that's always been the breaking point of the theology, or at least the philosophy behind all religious activity, and it is also the breakdown behind any political philosophy of some equality. At any rate, if you do not understand, if you cannot distinguish the forces in life over which you have no control, then you will take other people's actions as being conscious. Especially when they're egregious to you, when they're annoying, you hold other people responsible. And if you don't understand that there are forces in life over which you have no control, and one of them is your neighbor, but that's not theory. No, you can't leave it there. So because you leave it there, that's no more than almost crude fundamentalist theology saying, well, because he's run by evil forces. No. You got to understand that he makes no distinction. He exerts no control over his life, not because he's dumb, not because he's an infidel, not because he's a non-Christian. It's because there are forces in life over which no one has any control. And you remember, you've already forgotten where I started this, that one definition, a true, stripped of all pretense, stripped of all gaudy ornamentation, all metaphysical trappings, any description of a man awake or more conscious or a Buddha mind is simply, from one view, is simply someone who can distinguish the difference, knows the difference between the forces in life over which he has no control and those that he might. Do you understand that's what's lacking at the general level of consciousness of humanity? It always has been. It is not out there. It's not part of life's need. It would serve no general purpose. But that is what, if you now try to look at it at a specific level, that is what is lacking in all attempts to encourage people to be better. Not just to behave better, but to actually be better. And at first you've got to affect behavior. But the whole point is you're not just saying, well, you're just doing this out of rote. Don't just try to be nice to your fellow man because the church says so. You start doing that, but they say it's because there is a reward to it. There is something beneficial to it for you. And it strikes people as correct, and it is correct. It just has no particular pertinence to an individual man here or there. And so he can hear it, his nervous system reacts to it favorably, but he thinks, how can I do it? Because look how, and then you start having to fill in from whatever view it is would be germane to that particular time and place. He looks around and he says, well, how can I do this? How can I live a good Jewish life when I am surrounded by Muslims? People, just the wrong attitude. Or how can a Armenian, how can I live an upright Armenian type life when these Azerbaijans they've run amok. They're destroying our civilization. It's always on the basis that life out there, as personified by people, of course, individuals, is almost impossible. I could certainly, an ordinary man might say, at least to make himself look good if he was staying here before us, he might say, well, I'm not trying to wash my hands of all personal responsibility, but by God, you've got to admit, it's a hell of a task to ask somebody to try and live a Christian life, to try and be charitable, to try and treat your fellow man in a completely charitable and open manner, when, look, you can walk out in the street and somebody hit you in the head. You can walk up to a man and try to give him a religious tract, or walk up to a man, a homeless person, and say, go up and maybe offer to buy him a meal or something. You go up and get close to him, he suddenly pulls out a knife and says, give me your money. That's the way life is. And their attitude is, huh? But see, they are operating on the basis that the people can be responsible, that the people have some control over the way they're acting, and the only way you can believe that is not to have any understanding of the difference between forces over which you have no control and those which you might. Because without you understanding that, it is absolute foolishness. I might as well be trying to, whistle the Neil Diamond songbook for all the substantive value in what I'm saying, well, me or anyone else. But if you do not understand that there is a difference, if you cannot distinguish, if you cannot see the absolute obvious, that there are forces in life, there are areas of life. When I say forces, I'm not trying to insinuate any sort of occult, hidden. There are areas of life, there are aspects of life over which any man has no control. That's no secret. You got no control over the weather. You know we cannot stop hurricanes. You know that you cannot stop death. All these things at the physical level, specific instances of forces, areas in life over which a man has no control, any sane person goes, oh yeah. But once you leave the material, the physical level, you get into the unique world of man, the internal world, there is the difference. And you can even get people to go along with that somewhat up to a point. They go, yeah, that's true. But then they want to lapse into, if they're religious, either things about evil spirits in you, or if they're less religious, into ideas of subconscious trauma, subconscious motivations that can even be self-defeating, things beyond your control. They'll go along with that. That's not it. All the exhortations to become a Christian, to live a better life, without men knowing it, is them trying to encourage themselves. Life trying, in a small way, to encourage men to look upon and make a distinction between those forces over which they have some control and those which they don't. But the drive is so small, life's need is so small, that notice, it goes no further in the main than words. Because did it go any further at the mass level, then there would not be this distance between men's dream of what would be to be more conscious and an acknowledgement, an awareness of their present position. That is to say, if men were absolutely made aware of how life is, wherever they are, whoever they are, not what my definition is, they just suddenly were stripped of all their imagination. If they were still conscious and stripped of all their thinking about life, and suddenly they just saw what was going on, and could still simultaneously, we're talking about large groups of people, humanity, and simultaneously be still possessed of their dreams of what they think of as being progress, the reason to live, where we're headed, what it would be to be a better person, to be a Christian or Jew, etc. Those two things, according to how you want to look at it, they're absolutely mutually exclusive, or they're mutually destructive. An ordinary mind, the mind of humanity in general, could not operate on those conditions. If nothing else, it would simply freeze life on this planet. It would immobilize man, the thinking creature. In other words, he has to keep dreaming and theorizing, discussing, debating, arguing the fact that by God we can stop war. We can stop hunger. We can make people decent. There is no reason for people to engage in criminal activity. There's no reason that we cannot cure. Now, all of that is in complete defiance. All of that is a direct expression, admission, without them knowing, of their ignorance between the forces over which they have no control and those which they might. I'll admit that got a little more complex in the last 40 minutes than I intended. It is actually just quite simple. Except ordinary consciousness to your mind. Put it that way. To that part of your mind is part of the ordinary level of consciousness of this planet, the sane, normal outlook of people. There are no forces over which men have no control other than the physical forces, other than the laws of gravity, the laws of nature, climatic conditions. Other than that, the human mind, as it should, at the collective level, should not admit that there are forces internally over which a man has no control, even if they give it some credence, such as saying, well, we all do have forgotten incidents in our lives, if they take the psychological view, that still affect us but are so long forgotten, were repressed, or happened even before the age of full cognizance and we don't remember them. But they're not saying that they're completely beyond our control. To wit, the appearance of psychiatry, of counseling, of people talking about their problems. They do not say, a civilized man, if he says, well, myself and everyone else, the presidents, the popes, psychiatrists themselves, there are forces running them over which they have no awareness, no full awareness, and so in that case, in that instance, they are not in their control, but they are not admitting that it is beyond their control, because that is the whole purpose of counseling, psychiatric treatment. It's the whole point of religion, supposedly. But at any rate, to take a more so-called scientific, up-to-date approach, they say that that is the purpose. So they're saying, in essence, that there are no such things as forces internally in man that are totally beyond his control. The ordinary level of consciousness of humanity does and must reject that out of foot. This is not the land of cliches. Think right there, I was going to push in a slightly different direction, but think right there, assuming that you heard it and assuming that I am giving you, which I am, an absolutely valid, wet underwear in your face description, that if for no other description of being more conscious, if there were none other available, if you can hear anything, you could run with that. To be more conscious, to be enlightened, what a Buddha saw, what a Moses found in the internal promised land, what Jesus was describing as the kingdom of God within, all of that was the awareness, if for no other description, was the awareness that they finally looked around, or however it happened, and they could distinguish that there are forces in life, in life, forces in them, over which they have no control, and some that they might. All right, some that they do to get it going. You have to say that to ordinary minds or they just go into shock and dismiss it. There are forces that run through man. There are areas in men's lives over which they have no control and then some which they do. And so, all right, let's assume you go along with that. Now I'm going to tell you, that second part about forces which they do, you're going to have to strike the plural. You're going to have to strike that S. But before I get there, I repeat, that is an absolute, working, honorable description of what it would be to be in another state of consciousness, to be awakened in some way, to be enlightened. And those of you, I'm not going back and do it, but think about whatever you had read in the past of so-called mystical literature that may have your fancy struck and may have in your memory stuck. Think about the description. Think about what it was, and it fits that. Think about what you interpreted a Buddha to say, well, here's what life's about, or that Jesus said, well, such and such. Or some guru somewhere, some Sufi, and you take a description, if you strip away, if you can see that it was an allegory, or if you can hear it and read it as an allegory, the descriptions themselves, as complicated as they may have sounded, is almost impossible, as otherworldly, such as being able to not take insults personally, which is really the refinement of being able to turn the other cheek. It's only the simple that worry about, well, if a guy hits me, you mean I'm not supposed to hit him back? Folks, I'm going to assume that any potential audience I have for this is somewhere a bit more sophisticated and beyond that. I mean, well, of course, that's enough for ordinary, simple people, because right there, they're hooked for the church or whatever philosophy they've hooked up with for the rest of their life. Thinking, well, how can I do that? That's not right. Which, in a sense, is not right. You mean I'm supposed to let somebody kick me and I'm not supposed to kick them back? Oh, come on. But still, it sounds as though, whew, I mean, talking about otherworldly, an ordinary, simple man cannot conceive of that. Nor am I saying it should he in practice, because it is, taken too far, is self-destructive to the survival of the species, that you're not supposed to defend yourself. But at a more refined level, what they're actually saying, which, if you're just anywhere past the minimal level of being human, then the refined level is even really harder. Because you can refrain from hitting somebody that hit you first, especially they're bigger than you are. It's surprising how insightful many people can be when the guy is twice their size. And he hits him and knocks him down. His friend says, get him. And suddenly, for the first time in 20 years, the guy is suddenly a Christian. He suddenly remembers the words of Jesus or Moses, like, well, anyway, that can be done. Whether it was by the man's own understanding or not. That can happen. But the refined version is even harder. Is instead of saying turn the other cheek and we're referring to physical blows, what's harder, the more intelligent you are, that is, the more you're run by the yellow circus, the more that your life is centered around what seems to be your personality, your mental activity. The harder it is for a man to insult you. And whether you insult him back or not is for you to take it and just absorb it. I can talk about that. People have talked about it very close to that. In case you can go back, you can go thousands of years back in other areas of the world, and people are talking about that. Whether you identify them as mystics or not, anyway, people are talking about that would be a true warrior, that would be a true samurai, or that would be a real citizen. Or in one case, there was a man describing it that would be a real leader, a real king, a real prince would be a man who is immune. I mean, how can you assume that a man would be of royal blood, taking all this now, allegorically, unless you know better? How could you conceive of a man being of royal, regal standing, royal blood, that if a commoner could go up to the king, to a prince, and go, God, you're ugly. Not hit him, but just insult him. Or, I heard your speech yesterday, and that was terrible. Or I heard I saw your paintings. They claim that you're a painter. You know that a prince, you know that an awakened man, a warrior, all the way from physically being able to hold his anger in check unless it's called for, you know that's hard enough. But now get into the internal area, a non-physical area. What's really harder for man, to a varying degree, it begins to balance. The more you live by the mind, the more that you feel as though your life is internally driven, as opposed to just living by the senses, that you're just a simple, ordinary, fairly at the other end of the civilized spectrum, at the bottom end. But the more you're at the other end, the harder it is to actually to refrain from returning, from feeling hostility, from insults, to non-body blows, to intellectual blows, to insults to your spirit, to your creativity, to your mind. That is what is hard. Okay, what's impossible for ordinary people. But what is lacking? And ordinarily try to explain it that we're weak, or I hadn't progressed enough, I do not have enough faith in God or Allah, I'm not enough of a Sufi, I'm not enough of a Zen student, something's happened, I know that's what I should be doing, but hell, I can't. Well, there's an easy explanation why. Not to ordinary people, I'm talking now to somebody that might hear it. And that is, there are forces in life over which you have no control, and there they are. It's everybody else. And the part of you that when everybody else does what they must do, that is, that they are victim of forces beyond their control, which in the ordinary sense is every aspect of their life. except they can't see it. They're not supposed to see it. And the only way that you can resist from playing that game forever is to ever see that there are forces over which you have no control. And you might as well look out there. I'm going ahead and tell you just for the sake of dramatics. Look out there, and there it is. And when I say out there, I'm not talking about volcanoes and tropical disturbances in the South Atlantic. I'm talking about other people's behavior. There are forces over which a man has no control, and those which he does. That's where we were. Now, strike out the plural. There is only one force over which a man has any control. There's only one area of life over which a man has any control. And I'm skipping right along and assuming that some of you can hear this, and I don't have to keep bringing up the fact, because ordinary minds have already rejected what I said. They're supposed to. They're going to say, well, you're going to tell me there's just one area in life over which a man has control, and it can prove otherwise. It can prove that I'm wrong. I know. I can too. But you have by now, I'm assuming, that you do have some ability to distinguish within yourself that which just normally flows through your mind and that which does not, that which you seem to in some way contribute to. Not just passively listening to me, but in some way you can listen to something and you can create it creatively outside your own hometown. That is where you were born up here. That you can move at least slightly away from it. You can struggle against it to where you can hear that yourself. Not hear my words necessarily, but you can hear and talk to yourself in such a way that is out of the ordinary. That is not just simply, that is not limited to the general range of the level of consciousness of everyone else. So if you can do that, then you do know what I'm going to say without me proving any more. Or you can, I'll go ahead and give you a few seconds. You can play the rhetorical, prove me wrong game. But assuming that you understand that life in general, it's a fairly safe comment to say we've got no control over life. Which is why people can't really make any use of me pointing out that no one knows what they're going to say next. And if they listen momentarily, any sane, reasonable man, just for a split second, knows, by God, that's a fact. He knows it. He knows damn well he does not plan what he's going to say. He doesn't know until he opens his mouth, and yet he gets by. The world gets by. He just has to shut it off. That alone, it's not going to prove anything, but still building up to it with you people verbally. That alone should make a man have serious questions, to say the least, over whether he has any control over life, whether anybody does. To realize that my crowning glory, let's say it's a guy who teaches for a living, a guy who talks for a living, a man of ideas. And of course, a man of ideas has got to express them. And for him to realize, I have no idea what I'm going to say next. I just do it. I do it. People applaud. People vote for me. People buy my books. People come to hear me lecture. People find me a fascinating dinner companion. I'm considered one of the world's great conversationalists. I love hearing me talk. Of course, people don't really ever think about that, those who do. You think, well, why do you enjoy hearing you talk? Because you knew what you were going to say. I mean, it's old hat to you. Well, I don't know. I just do. So as not to get too distracted, because I said people can disprove what I'm saying, and I can too. I can speak faster than they can and disprove it. So forget the world out there. Forget whether we have control over the world out there, even though I point out that there are blatant, irrefutable examples out there in which men have no control, such as the weather. But also out there is part of what gives the illusion, the sensation that we do have some control, because man has changed, that man has affected the physical environment of this planet, or he's affected his physical environment. So it's hard to say that man has no control over anything, because an ordinary man can go, well, don't tell me that. Even 100 years ago, here in America, the avant-garde of civilization, 100 years ago, this time of year, we would all been huddled up in a small room, probably had the livestock pulled in here to help keep us warm. So don't say we've got that we have no control over life. We have, through our own wits. We have invented, or we have harnessed electricity. We turned it into electrical motors. Then we figured out how, and we created heating, indoor. We can now heat structures. So the mind can say that. So let's abandon that. That just sends people into fits. deludes them again. But internally, I'm going to give you credit that by now, you better know this or you don't know anything, that internally, to talk about you having any control over life ranges somewhere between a bad joke and a real bad joke, somewhere in that general area. A man cannot, if you know anything, if you are indeed a child of the muse of Delphi or Socrates, if you indeed know anything about you, about man, you know that you cannot change the way you feel. At any given moment you can say, I feel like hell, I feel depressed, I feel frightened. And someone, your best friend, say, well, we're sitting here in your house, why do you feel frightened? Don't feel frightened. You go, I don't want to. Or you say, I'm depressed, or I feel angry. Well, why? What happened? I don't know, I just feel kind of pissed off, feel frightened. And you go, well, stop it. Or you don't necessarily need a friend. You go, well, stop it. What the hell am I doing? There's no reason for this. You can't stop it. Just like that. Sensations come and go. Age comes and go. The physical sensations, I know people usually try to make a distinction between physical pain, physical sensation that, well, I hurt myself, and therefore I feel bad. And they think that there's a difference between that and I'm depressed. For those of you that didn't get it, several weeks back I said that one guy had adopted this attitude about when he felt bad, that he would look down and see, do I have any broken bones or am I bleeding? And if the answer was no, he told his bad feelings, take a hike. Which is it is the best possible diagnosis, the best possible attitude, except for the fact you can do that, but it does not, you know this, it does not necessarily stop them right then. Just because you say that, even though it is still the proper attitude, for you to believe, for a man to believe that he actually has any control, any control over his internal life, he has got to be ordinary with a capital O. He's got to be sane with a capital S, routine with a capital R, standard with a capital S. Just ordinary, routine, everyday, generally sane, decent, upright human being. That's what you've got to believe, or be, to believe that you have control over your inner life. There is one area, and one area only. Now, I'll throw it out and I'll give you a few seconds in case any of you want to wrestle with it and refute it to yourself. There's only one thing that any man has that any man can change, any man can control in any way in him, and that's the activities of his mind, his thoughts. You cannot, not to any profitable degree, you cannot affect the sensations of the body. You shouldn't be fooling with it. You certainly, as everybody knows, you cannot control your emotions. You cannot decide. No matter that you have concluded, with the help of a psychiatrist, you have simply, through your own observation and own insight, you have concluded that feeling depressed or feeling angry at other people, feeling mad at life or being stupid or whatever, you decide beforehand, after years of observing and wrestling with it, you decide beforehand, this is foolish for me to feel depressed. I'm going to die. Isn't that enough? So why the hell should I be depressed to live here? So I'm going to stop it. You can even go, by God, I'm going to stop it. You can do all that you want to. And unless you're an idiot, that is, unless you're ordinary, you've got no faith in that. You know it's not true. You cannot decide, all right, I've had it. I've been off and on depressed, for 40 years. And it accomplishes nothing. There's no basis for it. Nothing bad comes of it. It's just a feeling. It's just a feeling of gloomy funk I get, and it amounts to nothing. It comes and it goes away no matter what I do. I finally realize it. It's just, I don't know what it is. Part of my genetic makeup. So, I finally see the light. I'm going to stop it. Wake up. The point being, my little humor, is you know damn well, if you know anything, that you cannot decide, well, I'm going to at least exert control over specious, useless, ill-founded feelings. At least that, I'm going to do that. Oh, no, you're not. No, you're not. You can't. And don't say, well, wait a minute, I'm not sure that you're correct. I'm going to try some more. As J.B. would say, good God. A little more emphasis, a little more body English, but good God, you're 40 years old or whatever you are. And to say, well, wait a minute, I want a little more time. I'm not sure. I'm not absolutely convinced yet that I've got no control over my feelings. Well, drive safely on your way home. There is only one area. It's just as plain as hell once you see it. But it also, once you see it, you understand that as simple as it seems, the whole world, the level of humanity, the conscious level of humanity, is absolute blind to it. And that is, forget having control of the world out there. That is a game for children. That is a game for the ordinary. They're supposed to be involved with how much control can we exert, and by God we can exert some and all that. To begin with, you would already, I'm sure, agree, you or anyone else speaking generically, that have any interest in such as this, you already would agree, when it's pointed out, well, hey, our area of interest is not out there. Nothing wrong with the world, it's not an attack on the world, but that is not where the drive, that is not where the itch to be more conscious, to be a mystic, to search for something, it's not out there. You got to get past that. I mean, that's child's play. Then most people go, yeah, you're right, it's in here somewhere. What you're seeking is control in there. All right, no, go for that. I agree. And they could listen to at least part of what I said tonight about plucking the ideas, at least metaphorically, from religion and psychiatry, that the whole point of trying to be a better person is to exert control internally, where it counts, where it can change you. They go, that's it. Even people who would rebel against the idea of mysticism, they go, yeah, that's it, I go for that. And you go, well, your internal life, there's only one thing that you can possibly have any control over, and one thing only. And then you tell them, it's your thoughts. So of no importance but be according to who they were and how they were listening. There's only one or two possibilities. One is that they would just ignore it. Or they just say it's not true. That's not true. It can't be. And you can't challenge them after that, but I'll do it for you to do it yourself. If they were smart enough, if they were intelligent enough to have given me a hearing up to that point, and I said, all right, there's only one area, there's only one thing in your internal world. Of course, it's true out there too, but I give them, I bypass that for ordinary people. There's only one thing that over which you have any control, or can have any control, it's your thinking. And ordinary thinking creatures can hear that and go, well, and they go, well, that's not true, assuming that they just don't lose interest and wander off immediately. But if they stick around long enough, they go, that's not true. Now, you can't carry it any further, but follow me right quick, do it yourself, and you go, well, tell me why it's not. Think about it. Tell me what it is. What's the exception to that? And if they're just average intelligent, and they're holding their attention for just a little bit, and they're trying to listen to what you say, you go, really? I'm not trying to prove I'm right, but you say that's not true. And they go, no, it's not. Which they're supposed to. And they'll go, no, it's not true. If I say that's the only thing over which a man can have any control is his thinking. And they go, that's not true. I go, okay. They say, it won't go any further than this, but we're going ahead right quick because do it to you. Do it to your own understanding. And I say, all right, what's the exception? You say it's not true, and I hear that you're sincere. You believe? Oh, yeah. All right, what? What's the exception? What am I leaving out? Unless they go right back to just an absolute minimal level of consciousness, they cannot come up with one because there's not one. Continued next time. Make it.